We've now finished with the contours, and from the last video where we started moving all the contours up, we've completed that and all the contours are now in place. Now this video is going to cover how we take those contour lines and apply a terrain mesh. We're then going to take a poly mesh object and conform it onto that to make the mesh a little bit neater. And then we're going to cut that mesh out into the terrain and the ocean side, and then basically split it up into our 16 squares so that we are ready for modeling and texturing after that. So to start off, first thing I just want to show you how in perspective how those terrain splines should look, or those polylines from CAD. So those have all been pulled up according to the heights that were next to them. And what we want to do then is we then want to take this outline that we have and we want to attach that outline to those contours. Now that outline basically becomes our 0 altitude where the ocean edges. We can then isolate that just to have a clearer picture. And I'm also going to refine the edges a little bit so that we can not have the confusion of the line basically on the side here, which is saying 0, and right next to it we have, let's say, 200 meters. So that doesn't really work. So we will just do some editing here, create some vertices that we will then use to delete these lines. Just refine that as well. Maybe here and here, and then we will delete that part. So what we have now is the whole set of splines that are ready for the terrain tool. We then go into compound objects and click down on terrain, and immediately your terrain will be created. Next, you want to go down to stitch border and retriangulate. You don't really need these, but I just found it helps slightly because it neatens things up on the sides and it retriangulates some edges that might be a little bit odd. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to stretch out this terrain so that it is slightly larger. You can immediately go and convert it back down to an editable poly, grab the border, and then just using the scale tool and your shift key, you just stretch out to make a big flat object. If we exit, you will see that the original square that we're trying to work within is this one here, and that will be the final edge for the entire terrain. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create the polygon, the plane basically, that will be the final terrain. And I'm just going to, with the snap tool on, snap it on from edge to edge. And already with the default settings being 4 across and 4 down, we have those 16 squares, which is really great as it is what we're going to use to divide our mesh later on. What you can do at this point is you can make a copy of that, and by just pressing Ctrl V, selecting it, and pressing Ctrl V, and then you just click OK. Then that copy is the one that we're going to use for the mesh. I'll explain later why I created a copy. It is just to retain the original below so that we can see where those 16 subdivisions are. Next, what we want to do is we want to tessellate this square so that we have a finer mesh which is going to conform then onto our original terrain. You can do that by going into tessellate, adding a modifier. You can just undo the tension by right-clicking, go into 4, and I think looking at this we can add a little bit more detail just so that we have a neater looking mesh in the end. So we go to tessellate again, we do the same thing. We can go into 2 and we can see if that's too much. I think that's a little bit high, although if I had the computer power I would go for this level of detail, but I'm going to keep it quite simple just for flexibility's sake so that we can easily zoom in and out of our project. I'm going to go into the front view now, and I'm going to lift up this terrain without the snap tool this time so that it is evidently above our terrain model. Once we have that, we're ready to conform it down, and to do that we can go across to the conform tool by going into compound again, and we can click on to conform. Now just one thing, before you click the wrap to object, you can just click here hide wrap to object, That way we won't have a duplicate. Click here, pick Wrap to Object, and then select the original terrain that we created. Now this will take a couple of seconds based on the detail of the terrain and the speed of the computer. It is quite intensive. About 5 more seconds and we should be ready. Great, there we go. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to check by isolating to see if our mesh has been correctly done. And we can see that the mesh is there. You can see that there is slightly a bit of an error here on this side, so we can manually go and tweak that. We can first edit it, create an editable poly, take those vertices, and we can just move them up slightly. Right. I'm just going to also change this. This should be in meters. And now that we have our terrain mesh, we can go back and delete the original terrain. We don't need that anymore. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out the terrain from the entire square. So we can take this spline that we have, the one down below. Let me just try and grab that again. This one we can actually move down just as a reference for later. And we can just grab this one here. So that is the line which is basically between the ocean and the terrain. We make a copy just so that we can keep the original, and we can isolate that. Now we can take that, we can move it down slightly. We're going to extrude that. And as I've extruded it, I've just left a couple of segments in it. We don't need 50, we can use slightly less. Sometimes you really don't need to do it. It does help. Maybe 10 is good enough. And in our top view, we can just check that it's out. I mean, generally it helps if this part is actually outside. I just don't want to make it less accurate by shifting too many things around. So let's just give it a go like it is and see if it works. Now that it's extruded, you click on your main mesh. We're going to go down into Boolean, Pro Boolean, and we're going to do a subtraction. Now just one thing to check, if you go into advanced options, just say under planar edge removal, just say no edge removal. This way it'll preserve the mesh that's left over and we won't have any optimization happening to it, which is undesired in our particular case. Once we're ready, we click start picking and we pick on that main mesh. Wait a couple of seconds and crossing fingers, hopefully everything works out. Now we see that we haven't actually lost our main object, which we can just delete here. So you can see that it didn't work for us this time, so we're going to have to actually expand the mesh. And to do that, we're going to, oopsie, there we go. I'm going to take this mesh object here and we're going to just move that out slightly so that it's bigger. And we're going to create corner. That can be a corner as well. Right, and we'll just see if that works any better. Sometimes this is a process of trial and error, especially these booleans. So we'll just give that another go. And this time it worked just fine. So that's basically what we want to be left with. We want to see the terrain as an individual object, and that's exactly what we're looking for. Good, so now we have the last part to get to. We just are going to create the ocean section, and to do that we just need to reselect our ocean edge, which is this guy here, and we're going to select this original poly that we had. We're going to create a copy of it, and we can just right click here to move it back up into the 0 plane, which is the ocean level, which is 0. So same thing here, we want to cut it out. So we can do the same thing with that. We can move these out. This one slightly up, this one slightly down, just to make sure that everything is in the correct place. And the same process here. We move this slightly down, slightly below. That's correct. We're going to extrude this, EXT. And same process again, except this time we're going to choose intersection. And we pick that. So now we're left with the ocean. Now the one thing that I did want is I did actually want to keep these segments here. Now I do believe that before we did that, that advanced setting was clicked on again, and you'll see why we actually want this. We want no edge removal to be on, and we want to go back and click on start picking. There we go. So now this being our reference, we're going to change the color just so we can see it better, and we're going to exit. So there we go. Now we've created the mesh for the ocean, we've created the mesh for the terrain, both are individual objects, and that is it for this video. In the next video, we will look at how we're going to subdivide each of these two objects into their individual squares, and then we're going to add the texture onto it before we start building the buildings around. So that is it for this video. What we've done is we've brought in the contours that we've moved up into the right altitude. We've created the terrain. We've created the mesh that we've conformed onto it. And then we've gone and cut away using the Boolean tool, the two different objects being the terrain and the ocean. Great, on to the next one.